Hello and welcome to Bonchurch. Annually in early July, many of our Bonchurch residents have been happy to open their gardens to the public, enabling them to share their passion for gardening. It has not been possible this year due to COVID, so we have created a virtual tour of this year's gardens to remind our regulars and perhaps entice a few new ones next year. The Bonchurch terrain presents varied challenges, but with the combination of our microclimate and the enthusiasm of our garden owners, great things are achieved. So, here we go. We hope you enjoy. Our first visit is to Elcombe House, the home of Richard and Charlotte Wolby. This is a large, mature, well-stocked garden with verdant terraces and well-sculptured trees and bushes which are accessed by winding steps and pathways where you will often come across many wildlife visitors. Richard, who is also our village pond warden, tends the lush vegetation and together with the magnificent sea views maintains the perfect staging for his wife's superb collection of bonsai trees. Since 1985, Charlotte has studied this fascinating art form and has spent many years travelling to China for tuition. Her creations reflect the dedication and passion she has for these living sculptures, and she has many gold medals from the Chelsea Flower Show to prove it. Charlotte has many accomplishments. She's an excellent cook. She is outstanding at all types of needlecraft, winning cups galore at the local craft festival. And Richard, when he is not either tending the pond or the garden, is a fantastic photographer. In fact, many of the photographs that you will see today were taken by him. Now we go on to Friston, the home of Frank and Jane Madden. The Maddens are fairly new to the village and have set about making improvements to the property and garden, where they certainly haven't stinted on the planting, as the garden is always a blaze of colour and full of interest. The house, built in the late 1800s and of local Ventnor green sandstone, has a commanding position right at the top of the hill. It has a veranda from which the sweeping lawn leads you through the splendid display of plants and flowers and onto the amazing sea views. They certainly have created a little bit of paradise. And here we are at St. Bede's, the home of Marion Sibley and family. This garden was once an overgrown field at the foot of St. Boniface Down, and it is truly an example of determination, a whole heap of hard work, and an even bigger heap of compost. The garden has slowly evolved and matured with large shrubs and interesting trees. The plants and flowers have been carefully chosen and mostly left to do their own thing, with a little bit of guidance where and when necessary. The garden has become the lovely, naturalistic landscape it is today, with areas of peace and contemplation where you can sit and dream, enjoy the glorious sea views and the much visiting wildlife. We now come to the old rectory, home to Roger and Margaret Carey. Roger and Margaret first saw the house and garden back in 2011 and immediately knew it was the perfect property for them and their grown-up family. The house needed a lot of attention and it now complements the splendid garden with all its interesting details. From the top terrace with the amazing views over the English Channel, the sweeping lawns in front of the house, right down to the Victorian rose garden and side rockery on the lower terrace, and not forgetting the armoury sphere situated at the top of the steps. Due to the expansion of the village population back in 1847, the so-called new church was built. The rectory was to be built on the glebe land adjacent to the little old church lower down in the village, but the land lay in front of the property called East Dean, owned by the Swinburne family. They objected to their views being compromised, so Admiral Swinburne bought and gifted the land to the village on which the old rectory now stands, and he kept his sea views. And yes, if you were wondering, they were the parents of Algernon Swinburne. Here we have Rock Villa, the home of Jane Cox and Sue Loday. Jane's family have had a property in the village for decades, and it now is a holiday let. So when about 7 years ago an opportunity arose to buy another house close by, which coincided with their wanting to move back to the island, they took the plunge. The house had been empty for quite a while, and the outside was completely overgrown. They really didn't think they would have much chance of a garden. But after clearing nearly everything apart from a beautiful acer, they set about working and restoring the stone walls, laying a courtyard and a cobbled path. This combination has enabled them to catch the best of the sunshine and shade throughout the day. This sheltered spot has also facilitated them to be able to plant unusual specimens as well as the old cottage favourites. Jane comes from a very creative family. Her father was renowned artist Oliver Cox, who was also an experienced historical researcher. Both Sue and Jane are extremely accomplished in their own crafts, Sue in leather and metalwork, and Jane in ceramics. The Croft, home to Richard Ferraro. This is Richard's first venture into open gardens. He's not been able to devote very much time to the other half of the garden due to lockdown, but all being well next year, it will be easier for him. There are many interesting details here at the Croft, the elevated sun deck and the picturesque water feature with its little Buddha and all the special species of ferns. The house was the main home of the Day family for over 100 years. Back in the mid-1800s, Daniel Day, master stonemason, his friend Jonathan Jolliffe, builder, carpenter, and the Reverend James White, whose wife was given the manor of Bonchurch, meaning the whole area, they collaborated together, and the threesome were responsible for most, if not all, of the houses in the village of that era, including the new church built in 1847. The Croft was always handed down to the eldest son, who was always named Daniel, until it was sold out of the family in the late 1990s. The village pond was gifted to the village by H. de Vere Stackpoole of Blue Lagoon fame. It was a memorial to his wife. Although the pond is not strictly a garden, it is an integral part of the village and open gardens, and originally was tended by the council, but when the cuts came in, the BCA offered to take over the maintenance. 7 years ago, Richard took up the post of pond warden and has been doing a splendid job ever since. He organises and controls the abundant vegetation, sorts out the function of the pond lights, and makes sure the electricity and pest officer bills are paid. The public is not usually allowed in the pond area, but once a year at open gardens, the gates are opened and visitors can gain an alternative aspect of the village through the leafy foliage and over the water. Finally, to emerge again on the other side of the village road to be welcomed in for one of our famous strawberry cream teas at the old post office. The pond is a protective wildlife habitat and is home to some huge carp, a family of yellow-bellied slider turtles, who somehow survive our winter, many mallards and a moorhen. In the trees we have red squirrels, a woodpecker and a few bats. And we also have a visiting badger, a not so welcome fox, a kingfisher and a heron, Harold to his friends, who helps Richard keep the fish stock under control in the pond. Number 1 Grangeside, home of Mr. Steve Roth. When Steve moved to Bonchurch from the mainland, he left behind a large, well-stocked garden that he had tended for many years. But with his knowledge, expertise and determination, Number 1 Grangeside soon began to evolve into the delight it is today. The flower beds at the front of the house are lined with neatly clipped low hedges, enclosing splashes of colour and interesting grasses everywhere. Gloriously colourful hanging baskets are in abundance and lead you on to the side gate. Passing through, you walk past his packed vegetable garden full of wonderfully lush things to eat, and onto the back, where you are welcomed by beautiful stocked flower beds and interesting shrubs, well-tended firs and amazing flowers, and of course his velvety green lawns. No other word comes to mind but perfect. And now to Number 4 Grangeside, home of Richard and Debbie Green. Richard and Debbie are both very keen gardeners, and they have come to an agreement a great deal. Debbie has the terraces at the rear of the house, and Richard has the flower beds and the lawns at the front. Debbie's terraces are splendid this year, with a wonderful selection of different coloured and textured grasses, intermingled with many glorious splashes of colour. Richard's pride and joy are his much-loved dahlias, which unfortunately were not ready when we took our photographs for this tour. So Richard is sharing the other string to his bow. Shore Road runs down the right-hand side of their property. In between the hedge that lines their property and the top of Shore Road wall is a stretch of land that was basically an expanse of tangled brambles and decades of weeds. Well, no more, for he has transformed it with a wonderful, well-chosen selection of architectural plants and rambling roses. This combination creates a beautiful, dynamic, but natural look. And now, Southreach, also in Grangeside, home of Hazel and Tony Townsend. This is a delightful, well-organised and colourful garden, complemented by spectacular sea views. It has been thoughtfully and lovingly designed and is presented in distinctive sections. There are conifer and heather beds, a beautiful rose bed, and a long border containing a large variety of colourful plants and shrubs. To the left of the house is a perfectly designed Japanese garden, complete with a tea house, a traditional little bridge and classical Japanese planting. To the right of the house, and only introduced last year but developing nicely, is a tasteful Italianate garden with classic planting complemented by statues and complete with a fountain. Influenced by a visit to HMS Victory, Tony has constructed a ship's cabin underneath the house, and visitors are encouraged to explore. We are now visiting the Palms, home to Dave and Margaret Smith. This is a most unusual garden, not expected to be found at the end of a close in a quintessential English village. It would be more at home in the Mediterranean, or perhaps in an oasis in the Far East. Very aptly named, as the first view you have of the house is the pathway flanked by 2 giant palm trees. The theme continues as you walk through to the garden. At the rear, it's set against towering natural stone walls with most luxuriant palms and lush green vegetation. A stream runs through with bridges and many aquatic plants growing in the water. It is a shady glade, peaceful and tranquil, with its own unique and magical atmosphere. We have now arrived at Underrock, home of Sarah and Simon Harrison. Underrock is a quirky Italianate villa built in 1843 with a curious semi-hexagonal plan believed to have been inspired by the Temple of the Winds in Athens. The gardens were laid out by an early resident, Sir Lawrence Peel, a former Lord Chief Justice of Calcutta. His garden there was regarded as among the finest in southern India, and on the island he was instrumental in the decision to lay out what is now Ventnor Botanic Garden. So Underrock's gardens must have once been something special. However, when the present owners acquired the property in 2015, they had been neglected for many years and were heavily overgrown. Work on the garden commenced straight away and still continues. The hard landscaping is of dry stone walling that enhances the natural rock, creating a wooded garden full of terraces and different compartments. Many of the walls have been reconstructed, having slumped or collapsed, most recently around the driveway and onto the main lawns and into the rockery area. Some still remain to be done. Planting is of the classic Underrock varieties, many of which survived in an overgrown state. The owners have reinstated the vegetable garden, made a start on an orchard, and reconstructed the very Mediterranean terraces to the right side of the house. Whilst efforts have been made to conserve the very characterful old summer house, work remains to be done to move the greenhouse to a more appropriate site and reinstate the former ponds below the rockery. The work to date has recaptured vistas, colours and textures, beginning to reveal the magical place this garden can be. King's Seat, home to Sandy and Mike Fraser. Sandy and Mike love their garden, and this year they have added more raised beds and added many new plants, including a thriving tree fern. They described their garden last year as ordinary, but it is far from it. It is full of vibrant colour and interesting ornaments hidden amongst the flowers, perfectly complementing their fun-loving personalities. Being sociable souls, they have a great barbecue area close to the raised veranda leading out from their flat, where friends gather to eat or just sit and have a coffee whilst admiring the view. Mike and Sandy are both very involved in the community. Mike helps Richard with the pond and other village events. Sandy is the chair of the local Arts and Crafts Festival and a keen member of Inner Wheel, in fact, president last year, and both of them belong to the Bonchurch Social Club. And lastly we come to Mackett's Villa, home to Joy Lucas. This glorious garden, so named after Mackett's farm, one of the 4 farms in ancient Bonchurch, lies behind a very historic house. An original farmhouse converted in the Georgian period and remodelled for Lady Pringle in the Victorian era. It has now been divided into 5 houses, and this garden, designed and tended passionately by Joy, is just one of them. The gardens are not fenced between them, leaving the array of exotic plants with their varied height, leaf shape and texture to define their boundaries. All the gardens then open up to a large open lawn with great sea views. This is a rare opportunity to be able to include this amazing garden, as the only access is through Joy's house, and as on a good open gardens weekend we can have over 500 visitors, Joy quite naturally is unable to enter her garden. But as this year's is a virtual tour, she has agreed. So at least something good came out of COVID, to our benefit. The combination of the very sheltered microclimate and the recent further warming of the weather enables rare and exotic plants with varied blooms and foliage to flourish and overwinter safely. If you add into this Joy's artistic creative qualities and her deep passion for her plants, the result is breathtaking. Among the plants featured here are the Chinese rice paper tree, Tetrapanax papyrifera, with its huge fan-like leaves, when mature, about a metre across. The foxglove tree, Paulonia, which this year actually produced seeds for the first time. The Himalayan dogwood, Cornus capitata, covered in swathes of creamy white flowers that turn into bright red strawberry-like fruits. A very rare Burmese honeysuckle, echiums of both tall and dwarf varieties, Australian tree ferns and bottlebrush bushes, Aeonium Schwarzkopf, a succulent, purplish, almost black leaves, supposed never to bloom outside in this country, but it does for Joy. Hers are covered in stunning panicles of bright yellow star-like flowers. And last but not least, not forgetting the myrtle tree, rumoured to come from a cutting from Queen Victoria's wedding bouquet. Altogether, a splendid experience. So sadly we've come to the end of our virtual tour adventure. We hope you have all enjoyed it as much as we have in making it, and thank you so much for watching. If you would like to support either of the following, it would be gratefully received on both counts. Number 1, your virtual cream tea. All monies here will go to help maintain the village, the pond and lights for incidental repairs, and to refurbish the hanging baskets and flower troughs for next year. Please use the following bank details with the reference Bonchurch Open Gardens 2020. Thank you. 2. The Mountbatten Hospice. All monies here will go directly to the hospice to support the invaluable work they perform within our island community. Please use the following bank details with the reference Bonchurch Open Gardens 2020. Thank you. We would especially like to thank the following who have given their time and expertise totally free of charge. Sebastian Gonzalez for collating and editing this video. Richard Walby, Brian Lucas and the garden owners for taking and submitting their photographs. The BCA committee members and Bonchurch residents who support us throughout the year. And lastly, all our garden owners for lending us their gardens. Diary reminder. Open Gardens 2021 is to be held on Saturday, July the 3rd and Sunday, July the 4th. We look forward to seeing you all next year. So goodbye from the Beautiful Gardens of Bonchurch.